Welcome back everyone to another SEWAS psychology online workshop. So my name is Matt Yates and I'm here with my colleague.
Hi, I'm Vicky James Perkins.
And today is session 5. So we're thinking about helping your child, and the real focus of this session is regulation. So Vicky, I bet there's lots of parents at home who have been maybe a little bit frustrated that we've taken such a long time to actually getting to the bit where we talk about what you can do to really directly help your child. Can we tell them a bit about sort of why we've taken a bit of time to get there?
Yeah, so I guess it's been important to really think about. Lots of you will have read, I'm sure, things about attachment, early trauma. You'll have had your child report about your children's early experiences. But I guess what's the really difficult thing is joining up those dots as to making sense of why your child is behaving in a certain way or resisting your attempts to support them in their learning. So Matt and I have really tried to unpick some of that stuff and link it into what does that look like day to day when I'm trying to parent my child. And also we've introduced some key ideas and theories throughout that, which we're going to refer to now as we go on. So hopefully it'll start to kind of build on that and start to make more sense as we go through to what does that look like? What do I do when my child is really struggling?
Yeah, and this is the first of sort of three sessions that are specifically thinking about helping your child. That today's one is primarily on regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So just to bring us back to an image that we've shown a couple of times in these online workshops. So this is from the Beacon House, which has a fantastic website with great resources. And just as a reminder, really, that when we think about all of us, but particularly children, and even more so children who are traumatized, we've got to work with them in the order in which their brain was built. So that's from the bottom up to the inside out. So start with the brainstem, into the limbic brain, and then lastly the cortical brain. So today we are going to be thinking more about actually what that means for what we do and how we regulate children. So there's another fantastic Beacon House slide, which I must admit I use time and time again in my clinical work. And it's just so helpful because it basically just takes the Bruce Perry idea of working neurosequentially, so working from the bottom up, and helps us realize that whilst we want to kind of get to the top of this upside down triangle really quickly, we want to get to the talking and the learning and the kind of consequences and the kind of helping the child to logically understand while the behavior they did is not okay. That's all well and good. But if we think about the way their brains are built, we're going to have to start at the bottom here. The bottom it regulates, because we have to regulate them first. When that's in place, they'll then be able to respond better to that relationship with the parent carer. And finally, will that ability to have that more reasoned thinking be much more accessible. So yeah, I use this time and time again, and it's just so helpful to think of when things aren't going as you want them to go, let's just go straight back to the neurosequential model and start from the bottom up.
And it maps really nicely, Matt, doesn't it, to kind of all our attachment theories, trauma theories, and the neuropsychology. It's a really nice, clear way of trying to hold all that together. And like any model, what we're mindful of as well is that it's not as simple as just work your way through these 3 R's. So Matt and I will talk about that as we go on. But so it's great that it's kind of more clear and simple in this, very helpful to draw to mind, and doesn't make it easier necessarily. It's just a way to hold our thinking.
And just to really kind of hold that point, I've zoomed in on the bit at the bottom here. So heading straight for the reasoning part of the brain with an expectation of learning will not work so well if the child is dysregulated and disconnected from others. So that's where we've got to do that stuff first.
And we hear often, Matt, don't we, that our traditional parenting strategies go to that explaining, thinking about clear consequences. And what we know is that you'll be doing all those things. And what we hear time and time again, and what we understand from children who have had those early difficult starts, is that it's just not going in. And I guess this starts to make sense of why, despite all your best clear reasoning, repeated attempts at helping your child understand, they're just not clocking it. So this is more about why that is, why the things that you've tried over and over aren't necessarily working.
Absolutely. So just to kind of zoom in again on that Beacon House slide. So at the bottom we've got regulate, which it's just basically saying how we need to help that child's brain to calm their fight, flight, freeze, flop responses. And then that could take some time. We were just focusing on getting that regulation in place. And then that just opens the door then to be much more likely that a child might be able to respond positively to that relationship. So helping use that parent carer to help them continue to feel calmer, to help them make sense of what was going on through that sort of connected, attuned relationship. And then, yeah, the bit we kind of really want to get to, but it might take some time, is the top, so the reasoning bit. So once we've put those bits in the bottom, that means it's much more likely the child will be able to learn from their behaviour, to listen to information, to actually be able to start to reflect even possibly when they're older. So yeah, the bit we want to get to, but we've got to do all the bits at the bottom first.
And I guess I find it helpful sometimes when we're thinking about these theories with regards to our children. It's helpful just to have a little bit of a clocking quickly about how we experience that, so that it makes sense. So I don't know, all of you can think about a time that you've had a row with a friend or a partner. In that moment, no matter how well you're kind of trying to talk together, you're just not getting anywhere, and it's getting worse. So what we mean by regulate is when your body's fired and you're just feeling on adrenaline, you can't think straight. You need your body to get relaxed first, whether that's a walk or some time away. Then you need to actually come back with that person you've had that row with, and be able to connect again and feel like you're safe with each other before you're able to do a bit of that thinking about, hang on a minute, you didn't understand that bit, or this is what I was thinking, I got that wrong. I guess if we just clock into how it feels when we have ruptures, we call them in psychology, or rows or falling outs with people that we love or that matter to us, yeah, it can kind of feel like it makes a bit more sense.
Okay, so the focus of today's session, as I said at the very beginning, is regulation. So this is what we're talking about today. So the very much the bottom of the upside down triangle, really focusing on that brainstem. And today we wanted to kind of talk about three key areas of what we feel could be helpful to, as concepts to hold in mind. So firstly, brainstem calmers. So I think Vicky's going to talk more about that in a moment. Then about sensory regulation. So definitely is a bit of crossover with brainstem calmers and sensory regulation, but we'll talk more about it in a moment. And then lastly, kind of really bring it all together, talking about the importance of the parent themselves being the regulator. So all this fantastic stuff is only going to be possible with the parent helping the child to do it, and the child will not be able to do it on their own.
And we find most often that your kids will be often stuck in that regulating that very early brain development stuff. And of course, during a time of COVID, where we're less able to have more structured kind of movement stuff, this is going to be really under pressure. So this is where we find mostly our kids get stuck at, rather than kind of being further up the triangle.
And then just to kind of bring it back to some of the concepts we've spoken about a few times in this session, so our hand model. So if we want to get to upstairs brain, we have to absolutely, first of all, be focusing on brainstem and eventually limbic brain. So today we're really thinking primarily really about the brainstem, so helping this to be regulated. If this is regulated, this more relational stuff in the limbic brain can be much more accessible. And then the bit we want to get to, the reasoning brain, the upstairs brain, is much more likely to come online. So Vicky, can you tell us a bit more about brainstem calmers?
Yeah, so this has been developed, this concept by our resource says here, psychiatrist Bruce Perry, who's really leading the way in understanding neurosequential, so developmental trauma kind of in the brain and the different levels that happens. So what has been new with regards to the understanding that this idea brings to us is that depending on when the trauma happened to our children will depend on what they're needing now to kind of consolidate or go through those brain developments in the way that they need. So this refers to the idea that very early on, if we think about even when we're born, that we're needing lots of input on a physiological level, so in our bodies. So we're needing lots of, if you think about the first thing, our instinct when a baby cries is to pick it up, to have touch, to kind of touch oxytocin on our skin. Often we rock. with babies. You know, across the world you see this. So that's how we get our bodies to feel calm in themselves. Often we tap instinctively across cultures. So again, that's kind of replicating the heartbeat that baby would have been so familiar with. And often we hear people do that shh noise, which replicates the arteries, the movement of the blood, which will be very loud when a baby's growing. So basically, those kind of key inputs that a baby's body needs to start to get calm and to start to sort of wire itself up in a way that makes sense. So what this phrase captures is that early on, our babies, our young children who have experienced those traumas, who've come into adoption, would have had gaps in those. They wouldn't have had those experiences, or they wouldn't have had them enough of the time to kind of help their body wire up or get calm in itself. So we often see that's the case for our children. So this refers to what we need to do if our children have experienced those early gaps in their development. And often we know that when children find it, go from 0 to 100, or they struggle to be particularly coordinated, or they are finding very kind of strange movements, or they're quite rough in their bodies. There's lots of different ways that suggest this, and perhaps when we go on to describe what this looks like, it might feel like it comes more alive.
Great. So I guess the key message that Bruce Perry talks about is this, isn't it, Vicky? So patterned, repetitive, and rhythmic activity. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so often, traditionally, we've thought of if a child has missed something, then they need an intense kind of intervention. So often we see that in, a 1 hour therapy session a week or fortnight, or with a key worker, or with someone at school. What we're actually learning more about, particularly from Bruce Perry's work, is that in order for our brains to really develop, particularly at those early levels, what we're needing is small and repeated frequent experiences. So we're not talking about 1 hour of a special activity once a week. We're talking about 2 minutes, 4 times a day, every day. And I guess Matt and I will go on to talk about some of the ways that we've learned and that we've heard from parents that kind of replicates this. And again, this isn't specialist intervention. This is about what babies have early on in a very natural way that we just sort of do instinctively when they're very little. But of course, as they get older, it's really difficult to kind of retrace those steps in a way that's respectful to their age. So I guess if we hold in mind that these activities ideally would be, number of times a day, very light, very easy, very enjoyable, that's the stuff that's going to start kind of building those early brain development kind of areas that need work.
And we've got kind of a couple of examples here, haven't we? So we're very aware of it says it will be often quite maybe unique to your situation and your child, but these are sort of things we thought would be useful sort of prompts to kind of help you start thinking about it. So Vicky, can you tell us more about kind of some of the examples we've got here?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to start with the last one because I find that one quite helpful to kind of bring this idea to life. So often we think about, so for a child who struggles to get regulated in their body, get safe, often they've had little experience of those kind of rhythms through the day often. So for example, how many times do we sing or chant or talk through little poems, little nursery rhymes to our babies? So a good example clinically that we come across, Matt, for lots of different ages is this little piggy. So I guess it's easy to think of the baby stuff like round around the garden. So with this little piggy, what that provides, so if we're singing that, with a baby, we might sing that, well, on a good day, if we've had a lot of coffee, maybe 8 times a day. Even just 1 or 2 is great to kind of build those networks. So what that provides is a predictable rhythm with this little piggy went to market. It provides kind of the baby expects it. There's a rhythm to it. There's a pattern. There's a beat. Sometimes we might move. Depending on different songs that it's always lovely to hear different parents, different nursery rhymes that they've picked up, whether from different cultures or countries. There's some lovely Welsh ones out there. So And so that's what our babies need. That's a good example of how we provide rhythm, movement, predictability, enjoyability frequently in really small doses, often with young babies. And of course, as our children get older, this gets harder to do. So how do you do this stuff with a 10-year-old, for example? And what we think about, I guess, creatively with parents is, first of all, holding in mind, whilst they might be 10 chronologically and perhaps older in different ways, the kind of early brainstem stuff is still hungry at that very early, months old or toddler stage. So it's always quite surprising to hear how, if a parent starts to invite to a child respectfully, hey, can I just do this thing that you enjoyed when you were a toddler? Round and round the garden. Parents are so surprised at how much that child enjoys that still, of course, in a way that isn't patronizing. This little piggy's a good one to adjust, because the TheraPlay offers this idea of, which is an approach that we draw on. You can adjust it to be more, respectful to the child's chronological age. So, for example, this little piggy liked pizza. This little piggy liked buns. So that sense of you're kind of matching the child a little bit more. I guess the point from these rhythms and songs is that it brings just that: predictable, repeated, fun, rhythmic through your voice, through the body, lots of opportunities for that.
And like something we talk a lot about, Vicky, is singing, isn't it? So just
Yeah.
the value of songs, and how we were sort of all reflecting about how a really big one in the last few years in popular culture has been like Frozen, and how so many kids just love Frozen, and they will sing the songs again and again and again and again.
So I'm laughing, Matt, because I watch it like 3 times a day at the moment with my kids. I guess it was making me think you're right about, the stuff our kids go to. So any of you Frozen fans out there with kids, the beginning of Frozen 1 with the ice chopping song, it's very strong rhythm beat to it. And I guess what we're inviting you to think about is joining your child and really kind of, even if they like that, if you like this, dancing out the beat a little bit with them. Of course, all these strategies have to fit with your personal style. Some of you might not be singers or dancers, and that's fine. It's thinking about which bits might fit for you, and helping your child kind of consolidate those rhythms in an enjoyable way. And like you said, Matt, with music, and even just thinking about some of our other examples here. So sometimes parents, if you're particularly creative, will just do a little song at brushing teeth time. So what we're saying is, find those key kind of markers of the day, any little thing, laying the table, or getting a snack, brushing teeth, tucking in. If you can find a little thing to add into it that provides a little bit of a rhythm to that, whether it's a stomping or a song, you can just make up words: brushing teeth time, brushing teeth time. I know one of the mums I work with used this for her 11-year-old, and we were both really surprised that she really enjoyed it, and she asked for it the next night. So I guess have a go. Part of this is like feeling a bit thick-skinned about feeling like a bit of a Wallis in some of the things you do, because it might feel strange at first. But yeah, these are the kinds of things we'd be looking for to build on our child's missed earlier experiences at that level of the brain.
So I guess we're really kind of just saying, just give it a go, and you might be quite pleasantly surprised. And the thing, in hearing you speak, what's really coming to my mind is how, of course, in this presentation and our work, we're talking about children, and we're talking particularly about traumatized children. But all this stuff is the same for a completely well-regulated, non-traumatized adult. All this stuff makes our brainstem feel really, really happy. And I was chatting to Vicky earlier about how a couple of years ago I went to like a drumming workshop, and like just the feeling of just kind of being in a massive group of people just all drumming together, just fantastic, and it just made me feel so calm and collected and regulated.
That's a really good point. This isn't necessarily unusual strategies for specific traumas. This is more of a focused kind of approach, but we're all human beings. We all respond to those rhythms, and we'll all need them more at times when we're under stress. So it's really helpful to remember how we find that. For ourselves, some of us might run to loud music, or that's all the rhythms going on, the repetitions. So yeah, great point.
Okay, I'll move us on. So, just key message that Vicky's already said is remember small and often. So, not waiting for your child to be really dysregulated, not thinking, oh, we can do an hour of this at the end of the day. It's about small little bursts of a few minutes, even just regularly throughout the day, wherever possible.
And in a way that you enjoy, rather than we've got to do this as part of the kind of the day. Yeah, however you can, lightly and playfully.
So moving on to sensory regulation. So we're aware that there's quite a lot of crossover maybe in some of the things you might have been thinking of or seeing that or hearing us talking about in terms of brainstem calmers. And that's probably for very good reason, because there will be crossover, because they are things that help to regulate us. But yeah, so talking more about this. So all of us will have sensory preferences. So just things that we particularly enjoy, or maybe things we dislike. Um, and we can all benefit from sensory regulation. However, those who experience disrupted attachment and developmental trauma are much more likely to develop sensory processing problems and to need sensory regulation to feel okay in their bodies. So I guess a real kind of quick sort of summary to explain that. So if we think about the context of where a young baby or toddler or child is experiencing perhaps neglect and abuse, so often there may be things that we take for granted that help start our brain and bodies to learn sensory systems. So for example, with a baby, eventually they learn that, you put them on their front on the floor and they start to push up through their arms and they lift up their body and they're learning that sensation through their arms. Babies naturally will obviously grab things and put them into their mouth. You would give them things, they would explore them with their hands. All of this is just the wonderful groundwork in terms of the sensory systems. And obviously for lots of children, for different reasons, they may have been limited in their experience of that. So for example, you might have a child who's just left in a high chair or maybe in a car seat. Maybe they didn't have very much tummy time, so they weren't used to kind of learning about putting the feeding through their arms. Maybe didn't have many objects or toys to explore and to use. So what we often find is, yeah, children who experience early trauma and abuse much more likely to have sensory processing problems. So therefore, much more likely to find sensory regulation to be beneficial. So we've got a few bits here in terms of some key ideas to thinking about are things that, broadly speaking, generally tend to be regulating. So everyone will be unique, but these are some good things to kind of try out, which you may find that both yourself and your child may find regulating. So a fantastic one is, yeah, sucking a think drink through a straw. So I absolutely love this. So one of my favorite things is to have a milkshake, and I love that feeling of enjoying the milkshake, but having a straw and really getting that strong resistance to try to suck out the milkshake. And I guess that really just brings back to when we are babies. Obviously, one of the first things that we do is we breastfed or we have bottles, and that sucking motion. And I guess everyone is aware that babies just generally find this to be quite regulating, whether it was breast milk or a bottle or even maybe just a pacifier. There's something about it, something really inbuilt in us that sucking motion can be regulating. And then another one is thinking actually about, so what, of course, we enjoy food, we enjoy the taste, but there's a huge amount that actually goes into the feedback through our jaw. So actually the sensation, the resistance in something we're eating. So generally speaking, if we eat something that is particularly chewy or really kind of gives quite a lot of feedback, that can often be quite regulating.
Of course, Matt, it's helpful. You remember you talking about what you notice regulates your body, because these are going to be things that I guess the more we learn about them for our children, the more we're realizing we're having to get very good at this stuff for ourselves, particularly when we're living in very stressful times. Parenting a child who's bringing lots of trauma to you is hugely stressful. So it's really helpful to kind of help have these concepts come to life in getting good at them ourselves, which, goodness, is really hard. In some ways it's the hardest, is to clock it in ourselves. So yeah, keep thinking as you're listening to Matt and I talk through these, what you find regulating in your body, as well as what you feel your child finds regulating, and how you can build on that.
So next up is hearing. So really worthwhile thinking about. So kind of bring it back a bit to what we were saying earlier with brainstem calmers. So often things that are rhythmic can be actually quite regulating. This word, something that's prosodic, so something that has a lot of melody. So people always ask me to say, what's an example of this? And I always respond with Johnny Mathis. So he has this voice that just kind of goes up and down. I myself, so I love the Welsh accent. So there's something about it. It was just really, just I find really regulating, calming. It's because it's so prosodic. It's really got a lot of melody to it. And then thinking about kind of this makes so much sense. So there's a reason why babies and toddlers love lullabies, and they love what we might call sort of motherese tones. So that kind of up and down in pitch, that kind of way we talk about them. And I always give examples. So, you know, an out conversation, you might say, "Oh, look, there's a bird over there." If you're speaking to a baby, you go, "Oh, look over there! Look, there's a little birdie. Can you see him?" And naturally, this way that you talk just comes out of your mouth. And there's a reason why we do that, and it's because it can be quite regulating.
I hear a lot of parents say that if they're having trouble sleeping, they'll listen to a podcast with a particularly kind of like low voice,
Mm.
calming voice to help kind of really quieten down the brain before sleep. So,
Would you know what? Talking about sleep, so the next one has been a real revelation for myself and my partner. So, um, thinking about background noise. So this is a bit different. So this is thinking about something which might actually block out maybe sounds around you. So you may be familiar with white noise, but actually there's lots of different colored noises, and they're all just basically at different frequencies of sound. And the one that I personally find my favorite is brown noise. So my partner and I have actually started having a constant brown noise on in the background while we sleep, and it's just been great. It just kind of gives you something which your brain kind of tunes into, and before you know it, I'm off to sleep. But what's also nice is it just is the right frequency to kind of muffle out sounds. So I live in a city centre, so there's often kind of a bit of buzz and things going on. Not so much in the moment, but in normal circumstances, and it can often just be enough to kind of stop my brain waking up when it hears one of those noises. So something just to think about. So I know some people who have had that actually just in the room on a speaker, or maybe even if a child felt happy, they can actually have their own set of headphones. Just something which can just sometimes be calmer. It just like blocks out some of the overload of auditory sensory information coming into the brain.
mm-hmm.
So next, thinking about muscles and joints. This has got a fantastic fancy word called proprioception. I'm not expecting you to remember that, but basically if you think about the muscles and the joints, broadly speaking, these are all the kind of things which give your limbs and your body a real strong sense of something's happening to them. So when you're hanging, when you're pulling, pushing, carrying, you're getting lots and lots of signals from your arms and your joints and your muscles and all the parts of your body that are sending signals to your brain about what those parts of the bodies are doing. So often when I've spoken to occupational therapists, they talk about how it's almost like the more signals your brain gets from your body about where it is and what it's doing, the calmer it feels. And this is kind of why it kind of makes a lot of sense. And when I kind of think about this, it just, the more you see it, the more you understand it. So if you have children in a playground, you know, what do? They don't just sit there. They just immediately are all over the play equipment. They're doing all these things that you can see here, bullet pointed. And there's an awful lot in it in terms of it helping us to feel regulated.
You know, when I see your list there, Matt, I instantly think of children in ASDAs. It's
Yeah,
particularly a big environment, but this is what you start to see, and it's a very clever way of them trying to get safe in their bodies in an environment that's big and loud and bright and long and boring. And but
mm.
yeah, it'll be interesting for parents to see which bits of those perhaps fit with their child particularly, and the ways that, like you say, which young babies and children naturally would have that kind of input in their body. So yeah.
And again, as we keep saying that we're talking about children, but this is the same for adults. You know, think about why do some adults enjoy going to the gym or playing sports. Some of it will be, you know, the social aspect or the physical fitness, but a big part of it is probably actually a lot of this. So they're getting lots of proprioceptive feedback in playing the sport or lifting weights. So we kind of, Vicky and I just put down some brief just ideas of possible ways you could do this with a child. So there could be all sorts you could do, but just to give you some inspiration. So you can read the list there. Ones that kind of just particularly stand out for me, which again might fit back into the idea of sort of more formally brainstem calmers is the windmills and the crosswalks. So the windmills is where you take a finger and you lean down, you touch the opposite foot and repeat. So right hand to left foot. And crosswalks where you raise your right knee and your left hand will come to touch your right knee, and just repeat back and forth, back and forth. So things that, yeah, just look at someone's there.
For some children, particularly if they're younger, you might want to throw some creativity in there and do that thing of pretend. Oh yeah, there's a fairy on my foot. Quick, pick it up, chuck it away, or whatever. Just you're trying to throw a playful way to do it. And it was reminding me that what we're talking about, Matt and I, ideally are the kind of the doing this stuff routinely and regularly. But of course, we're also responding when our child is in the moment struggling. So I hear parents tell me some great ideas in Asda's, for example, they make the child push the very heavy trolley for a part of the way, obviously, because they'll get bored out of that. Or outside doing just playing on the bars where the trolleys are before going in, doing the swing around. So your parents find very creative ways to try and get these met without being explicit. You have to calm your body down, do this now. You're working out what might fit for your child and what's possible for them.
One that really reminds me of is how you could kind of make out that you're asking your child for their help. So you could be just, oh gosh, do you know what? I've got all these books here. Can you carry this big pile of books up the stairs to this room? And you don't actually need the books to be moved, but it's a really good, easy way of kind of giving a little job where that child's then going to carry something quite heavy. Similarly, I know it's perhaps trickier at the moment, but if you're out and about, just having a rucksack with some heavy items in the rucksack, that gives really fantastic feedback, just that weight that's putting down on the shoulders. So there's lots of really interesting ways you can think about this. I've also just remembered that Beacon House have recently, during the COVID-19 lockdown, produced a few fantastic videos, and one is, I believe, one of their occupational therapists demonstrating almost doing like an obstacle course in the home. It's just obstacle course of different proprioceptive activities. So
Sorry,
really,
Matt. I was just going to say, before I learned about this stuff, the first thing we do when our children start to do these behaviours, particularly perhaps out on the walk or in the shop, is we say, stop doing that. It's a natural impulse, isn't it? So I guess it's okay if you've done that, because often we're trying to also shape our kids' behaviours. I guess is what this is clocking is if they really keep struggling, if they're on the walk and they're just going crazy on the pavement, then they're needing a bit more of this. So I guess what this is asking you to think about is how might you get a bit more kind of structured ways that your child can safely and freely get this kind of input.
Fantastic. So I'll move us on then. Moving on to balance and orientation, it's another fancy word, vestibular. So that basically kind of talking about your inner ear, so to speak. So I guess a quick way of making sense of that is how if I shut my eyes, but I do a handstand, not like I probably do that, but if I did one, I'd still know, even though my eyes are shut, that I'm upside down. Or when you're in a car and you're a passenger, you could shut your eyes and go round a roundabout, but your body still knows you're going round a roundabout. So some things to think about that your child might find regulating. So anything that's rocking back and forth, so a playground swing is a great idea. Something that's jumping up and down, so like trampolines, spinning. But a really important final bullet point. Some children, particularly those with some perhaps sensory processing issues, might find this stuff dysregulating. So by all means, play around with it and see what works for your child. But of all the systems, this often is one of the ones which can be dysregulating for some children.
And I guess you'll have a good sense already. It's what your kids are already doing, but perhaps in inappropriate ways. So perhaps they're jumping up and down on the sofa they're not allowed to, or the bed. It's that if your child's doing that, it's about guiding that he needs that. But how do I get it in a way that doesn't break our furniture? So they'll already be giving you big clues if they like this stuff.
Okay. So then moving on to touch. So with touch, you can have light touch and deep touch, but I guess we're focusing here particularly on deep touch because this is quite often can be quite regulating. So some examples here are, a massage. So maybe it might be that actually like a formal massage, what you might do as an adult might not quite fit for your child, but you can have a go actually turn it into a game. So certainly, so I deliver therapy as a therapeutic approach, and one of the games we often play is a weather report, and that's basically doing a massage on the back with hands, but putting a story to it. So making the shapes of the clouds with your hands, doing lots of rain, showing the water going through as a river, a big warm round sun in the sky. So you're really using really lots of firm, consistent touch, firm and slow touch to just massage the body, but you're making it into a bit of a game. Something that I love is making a child burger. So a child burger is basically if you get like a sofa cushion or something thick, and put it on the floor, that's the bottom bun. Then you put the child in on top of that, and that's the burger. And then you kind of invite them to put what toppings they want to put on the burger. So you could be like, oh, I know, ketchup or gherkins or onions, whatever they like. And that's just an excuse for you to get those more cushions and blankets and stuff and pile them on top. And then finally you finish off with a big top bun, so another sofa cushion if you've got any left. And you push that on top and you squish them down, and you made a child burger. And that kind of just gives lots of deep touch, really. And you can kind of play with that. And as long as your child feels comfortable, you could even kind of put a bit, just maybe of yourself, your hands on top, just to push down and really give a nice big feedback to that child.
This is a good indicator when a child is a bit too rough with cuddles, isn't it, Matt? Or if they run and barge and push kind of often, is usually a sign that their body is needing this.
Yeah, really good. Yeah. So yeah, if you kind of feeling like maybe I'm having a hug, but this definitely doesn't feel like a real sort of loving cushy cuddle. It's kind of like just trying to get some feedback. And that's why actually at the bottom there, I've got kind of bear hug, because maybe sometimes that's what you need. You just need a big, tight squeeze. So to really give it a big squeeze. And then similarly there above that, so maybe just being wrapped up tightly in a blanket.
And Matt, you mentioned these are some lovely ideas from TheraPlay that obviously parents can look up Google some more ideas about or find some more details of them. I was just thinking about ways that parents might sneak this in naturally. And I know often parents will talk about doing like an extra tuck in, thinking about that firm touch and pressure. So before bedtime, as well as your routines, getting an opportunity to kind of massage through the form of, let me just check both your arms are here, let me feel them, and if your child likes the firm pressure, do the firm pressure as firm as they like, all the way down to their fingers. Let's check your legs, whatever your child feels comfortable with or can tolerate. So those are some ways of this idea about how do you get it in small frequent ways. Or when they sit down at the table to eat or sit down for their TV show, hang on, let me just check all your toes have come here to watch the TV today, and get your hands on their toes. So basically, anyway, you can get, if your child likes this and feels safe with it, hands-on, that's kind of predictable. If you do that, I check all your toes, right, you're here, let's watch TV, or, whatever it is. I guess the point is that it's starting to become a lovely little ritual between you that can be predictable, enjoyable, and they're getting that feedback.
Fantastic. So again, we've had this slide already, but just to remember, small and often. So not waiting for the big explosions that being really dysregulated, trying to just sprinkle this frequently in just small little doses throughout the day can be a really helpful thing to start bringing into just the way that you live your life and your time for the child. So to bring it to our last kind of point, so being the regulator. So I guess in its essence, what we're talking about here is when a child is dysregulated and experiencing dysregulation, the only way they can get to regulation is firstly through co-regulation. So that basically means you as a parent, you are going to have to help your child to regulate. They will not be able to do it on their own.
Because developmentally babies couldn't do it, don't do it on their own. They learn through their parents doing it over, or the caregivers over and over and over. And if your child struggles to do it on their own, it's a sign that they haven't had that done for them enough so that they can learn that yet.
And the hope is, that will help lead to regulation. So like Vicky's describing, for those who perhaps had the starts in life where they were experiencing trauma, abuse, neglect, they would have had quite a lot of this. So lots and lots of parents co-regulating, and that's what led to them, as they became older, starting to be able to regulate themselves. So children who experience this trauma will not have had this experience, and therefore they will find self-regulation at times almost impossible. They will need just lots and lots and lots of that co-regulation. Okay. So, some things to kind of think about just more broadly in terms of, yeah, you, the parent, helping your child to regulate. So, first things first, as we've talked regularly in these online sessions, you've got to be able to regulate yourself first, because life is tough generally. Life is particularly tough at the moment. But if you yourself are in your downstairs brain, you've got to think about what can I do initially to help myself get back into my upstairs brain, because it's only when you're in your upstairs brain that you can even be able to begin to consider being able to help your child to get into their upstairs brain and help them regulate.
And I guess that it was making me think about the number of times kind of we think we're regulated,
Yeah.
like I'm all right, but actually the tension's just in our body. And your second point about body language is, our kids can read that, anyone can read that. So I guess it's not to say be better at regulating, it's just we're just trying to clock how hard it is and how visible sometimes, even if, when we're doing the best we can, if we're not regulated, our kids will feel it, they'll know it.
Absolutely. So yeah, so just really helping you think about how, whilst we're kind of very much talking about techniques and ideas, just thinking about actually how can I help give off a sense of regulation and calm through body language. There can be so much thing that can be just completely non-verbal. We just be just like, oh gosh, things are really tricky right now. Just even just giving those cues of I'm taking this big sigh, this big breath, just to help calm the body. And then kind of moving on to, yeah, we thinking about how some of these concepts you might feel that they are certainly kind of initially going to be quite hard to do if it's not something you're familiar with, and thinking about how it's going to have this idea of kind of like, oh, okay, right now, so Tom, we're doing this now. And what we would perhaps argue instead of this is perhaps a bit more just thinking, how can you incorporate it just into play? So rather than kind of making it this big, unique, separate thing, just it becomes a way of just playing. It might take a bit of practice and you need to work with what's right for your child. But so often play is the way in. It's the way in to engage and to draw children into what you're doing. And hopefully the idea is before they know what's happening, they're just kind of in it and they're doing it. And I guess with that, the final point that I think is probably one of the most important with this idea of introducing these different activities with your child is you will basically need to guide the activities, and parents very understandably can be so used to kind of just saying like, oh, I think maybe we should do this now, or do you think maybe we should play this game now? And instead maybe having a go at just doing it. So just getting in there, starting it, modeling it, so actually maybe just doing the activity. And what we often find is that can be an easy way of just getting kids in because it's just happening. There's not less of a conversation about it. We're just going, right, this is what we're doing, and perhaps you're modeling it, perhaps you're demonstrating it, and that could be the way to instead kind of just help that activity to take place.
Mm. We were thinking about what can be helpful sometimes, particularly with, in your parenting style where you're trying to be so thoughtful and connected to your child's inner world and give them choice. Is thinking about what would we do with a baby who was dysregulated, sitting on the floor playing. We'd pick them up and we'd say, no, Lego away, you're tired, we're doing this now. Not to say that you'd patronize your child as if they were a baby, but just that sense of you take over to kind of help them get safe in a way that they won't know how.
Mm.
One mum shared an example of how she did this with her teenage daughter, who was very dysregulated, and for her that was fight, attack, challenge. Mum just said, look, I need to go and water the garden right now. I can't talk about this right now. And she just went, and she said, come with me if you want, come with me. And she went to the garden. The daughter stayed there, and she started watering the plants, and the daughter came out and stayed with her in the garden and went alongside her watering the plants. That's not to say that's a strategy that will cure all your problems, but just that sense of hold it lightly, do it. You can't force a child to do anything, but if you kind of just hold that calmness and that sense of, I'll be right back, got to do this, let's do this together. It's an offering that can help a child come more alongside if and when they're able.
So that really brings us towards the end, really. So I guess our summary for this session is we've got to respond neurosequentially. So we've got to respond to our child's brain by working from the bottom up. So we've got to focus on initially getting that regulation, that brainstem. Then, once that's in place, we can start to think about a bit more relational stuff. And then and only then can we even consider that more reasoning clever, core school part of the brain, upstairs brain thinking. And as we said, today's session has been very much thinking about the bottom of that brain stem.
Which I guess is just to say, even though we're excited to get to the next R and then the final R, but this R is the hardest, and it's the one that our children find the trickiest, and they're needing lots of consolidation of. So I guess don't lose hope if you feel stuck on this bit. It makes sense why you're stuck on this bit. This is just trying to be a bit more of a, I guess, be a detective about where they're at, what's possible, in your circumstances with your resources. So we'll keep revisiting these ideas as we go along.
The next ones, I think I've said this a number of times, but yeah, small and often. That's the key of all the messages today's session. And then lastly, yeah, so just to really reiterate the point that your child will not be able to do this on their own. They're going to need you to help them do this. They're going to need you to help do that co-regulation so they themselves can feel regulated. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Anything else you'd like to add, Vicky?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Bye.